Good afternoon, good early evening, Chairman Wayne and members of the Judiciary Committee. I'm Megan Hunt, MEGAN-HUNT, and I'm here today to introduce LB87, a bill to change the age of medical consent from 19 to 18. This summer, I heard from a Lincoln doctor of physical therapy who told me about seeing many 18-year-old patients who had to get parental consent for treatment. Some of them, she explained, are estranged from their parents, or they're not in frequent contact with their parents, or it'd be really hard to get a hold of their parents, and those patients are unable to get medical care they need without parental consent. I'm glad this medical professional reached out to me because it inspired me to pick up where Senator Moorfield left off on this topic, and I think it's something that we need to return to in this legislature. This bill lowers the legal age of majority from 19 to 18 for healthcare decisions. Senator Moorfield originally started working on this concept in response to University of Nebraska students who contacted him to talk about the difficulties they experienced receiving health care in a timely manner while living on campus. In almost all cases, except life-threatening emergencies, when providers already have a duty to save a patient's life, parents or legal guardians have to be contacted or sign off on consent forms for providers to have permission to treat an 18-year-old patient. I looked through some of the history on these bills, and there were all kinds of stories about broken limbs, infections, and various illnesses that went untreated for too long while students attempted to get consent from their parents. There was one case where a student's parent lived in Japan, and they had to suffer for hours until parental consent could be obtained and they could be treated. You can see how this would be a particular hardship for international students. A much more common case you would see was you would have a student come to UNL or UNO from Scottsbluff or somewhere else in Nebraska, and they'll be there for college, but they'll suddenly get a case of strep throat or something, and they do the right thing, they go to the doctor, they try to get better so they can go back to class and get on with their life and go to work, but they can't get the medicine they need to function and study and pass their exams without their mom and dad signing off on it. This is especially egregious in cases of moderate or severe illness or injury because we don't want these young people to suffer needlessly or potentially get worse. But it's not just a barrier in those situations. 18-year-olds living away from home can't even get basic preventive care like a flu shot or an annual exam without a parent coming with them or providing consent because of our age of medical consent in Nebraska. While it was the students that led the charge on advocacy for this issue, I want to note that not everyone who's 18 goes to college, of course. Many people get jobs and move away from home, and there's so much dignity and independence and autonomy in that. So while a lot of the youth that have spoken out about this have done so because they have had experiences as students, it's also unfair for any young person who's left the home of their parents or guardian and is out on their own and independent, living as an independent young adult. It could be anywhere in the world or in the country, and if they're in Nebraska, they still have to get medical consent from their mom or dad to get health care. In 2018, the legislature passed an exception to our age of majority law that allows for 18-year-olds to consent to mental health services. This was also largely driven by student advocacy. If 18-year-olds can make their own decisions about mental health treatment, we shouldn't require them to get parental consent for physical health treatments either. We are only one of 3 states whose age of majority is older than 18, but Nebraska is the only state that does not allow 18-year-olds to make healthcare decisions. 18-year-olds in each of our surrounding states have been able to consent to medical treatment for some time. In fact, Lincoln or Omaha students can just drive across the border to Council Bluffs or Iowa to get care right now if they want, but they shouldn't have to do that. I'd like to also explain the second component of the bill. Section 48-285 provides that DHHS has the authority to determine appropriate medical and psychiatric care for youths in its care. However, there's no corresponding statutory authority for youth in custody in the Department of Corrections. The Department of Corrections operates one facility for minors in Nebraska, the Nebraska Correctional Youth Facility in Omaha. So the second piece of this bill is kind of correcting an oversight in our existing statute, giving appropriate authority for juveniles in this correctional facility to be able to consent to medical treatment because their circumstances really limit them from being able to obtain parental consent. This is important because there are times that a minor in custody will need urgent medical care. And if a parent or guardian cannot be quickly located or contacted, important medical care may be delayed. This could have some serious injury or illness for the use in this system. There could be varying levels of parental involvement. Some may maintain contact with their parents, but some might not at all. So those who aren't able to get parental consent may just have to go without treatment, and that can make them sicker than they need to be while they wait for care. What was really interesting to me in the research my staff and I were doing around this bill is the legislative history about why Nebraska is the only state where the medical age of consent is 18, not 19. It seems that way back in the early 70s, when there was a wave of states lowering their ages of majority from 20 or 21 down to 18, Nebraska actually tried to lower ours from 18 to 18 from 20, but a compromise was made in the legislature to lower it to 19 instead, because people were concerned that 18-year-olds would be able to drink and they would be vulnerable to financial predators, and it was one of those under the balcony compromises that now we've lived with for 40 plus years. And since that time, of course, the drinking age has been raised to 21. In Nebraska, we've also allowed exceptions in our age of majority law for 18-year-olds to engage in all kinds of financial decisions, to obtain financing, to get credit cards, mortgages, own property, all of that, and we haven't had a problem there. So when you look at the legislative history of why this is, it's because in the early 70s, people were afraid 18-year-olds would be drinking. And I don't think that that's a good reason to keep things where they are today in 2023. At 18 in Nebraska, you can go to war, you can vote, you can consent to mental health treatment, consent to STD testing and treatment, own property, drive, own a firearm. LB87 is a bill that students have been asking us for years, and just due to a weird legislative history, Nebraska is behind the times on this. 18-year-olds in every other state have this right, and there's nothing special or different about us and our young people that can't allow them to do the same. This bill will improve access to health care for young adults and improve health outcomes by ensuring they receive the care they need when they need it, rather than waiting until things become more painful and costly. No young person should have to suffer with illness or injury because they can't reach their parent to obtain consent. I also passed out an amendment. The Department of Health and Human Services brought this amendment to me today. I said that works for me. It removes their opposition, and I'll let them speak to it more. But part of the conversation we had was whether they were going to come in opposition or neutral based on the fact that I agreed to allay all of their concerns of the bill. So I'm hoping they come in neutral to explain the amendment to you. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the committee? Senator Blood.
Thank you, Chair Wayne. I know that you are passing it on to them to explain their amendment, but I'm going to ask it of you. Doesn't their amendment basically do what your bill does?
Their amendment,
with the exception of require consent by a parent or guardian, would be the only services they would approve.
my understanding, I hesitate to say on the record because I feel like I understand this 80%.
I don't want to put you on.
My understanding is that because Health and Human Services has youth in care who are age 18, they want to make sure that there aren't elective procedures or things like that then they would be on the hook to pay for. If you look in the legislative history of this bill, it's been introduced a couple times.
Right.
When Senator Moorfeld introduced it, the fiscal note from the Department of Health and Human Services said that the cost was indeterminable. And this year they said something similar, that it's just indeterminable because they don't know if they would then be on the hook for paying for any treatments for people age 18 in their care. But I will let them speak to the nuts and bolts of it because it was explained to me and I said that sounds fine and please come in neutral. So that's what our conversation was.
Well, it would certainly be great if we could ever get in front of something instead of always being at the tail end of things in the United States. So good for you for bringing it forward again. And I can tell you that I'm in that demographic where the drinking age was 19 in Nebraska and 18 in Iowa. So that's what happened to our generation. Lots of times you look back and you think about how they've changed the laws, and it's clear that there were things that were negotiated the laws don't always make sense, and you know, you look at speed limits and alcohol and where we were at in the 70s and where we're at now. So I'm glad that you put on the record the historical process that this took and how we got where we're at and why we need to change it. So thank you for that.
Sometimes I think we think that there's some wisdom in the people that came before us, like, oh my God, there must be a reason that we have to wait 2 years to vote after we have a felony conviction. There must be a reason that we have medical consent age of 19 and not 18. But sometimes you look and it's just a deal that was made and there's no reason. Right. This is one of those things.
Senator Decay.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Hunt, one question. You brought that up with your answer to Senator Blood, and I was thinking about this, but what happens when you talk about elective surgeries or whatever, elective procedures, when that student, that kid, is still under their parents' health insurance plan, where those procedures have to be reported to their health insurance like 48 hours before it can be enacted. So that's my concern, would be my concern, is that kids are doing a procedure and then all of a sudden they're getting held on the hook because they didn't properly report that in the time manner to the health insurance that their parents are paying for at that time.
That's a good question. I hope someone behind me can speak to that, because given the fact that there are kids on health, kids meaning I should say 18-year-olds, not kids, but young adults who are 18 on their parents' health insurance in every other state in the country, I would assume it would work in Nebraska the same way it does in Iowa and South Dakota and Kansas and so on. I think insurance companies would know what to do.
Any other questions from the committee?
Thank you, Chairman Wayne. I don't have much to do for close. I was going to address some questions that came up, if any came up, but if you have any additional questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions from the committee? Senator Decay.
Just to follow up, Senator Hunt, my concern isn't about the 18-year-olds getting medical. My concern is to make sure that they or their parents aren't going to be stuck on the hook for health insurance costs that, for elective surgery. So if you can find an answer for that,
we'll get you an answer. Is your concern about like running up a phone bill, basically, like 18-year-olds consenting to care, so then they go get a bunch of procedures and then the parents don't know that their insurance is covering this?
I know a little bit from personal experience that if it's certain insurance companies and they are large ones that will want you to get a pre-authorization before you have procedures done or a lot of different things done. So I don't want the parents to, or who's ever the insurance carrier to be stuck for a $3,000-4,000 bill that comes as a surprise in the mail to them. So,
is it typical to get pre-authorization for care? My understanding is it is, that it would all have to be pre-authorized anyway.
Not every procedure that I've been involved with needed pre-authorization, but just to make sure that that's my concern is, not for the fact that they are getting health care, is the fact that they are getting health care that's not going to, that they need, that's not going to be stuck. They're going to be pulling it out of their pocket rather than out of their insurance.
Sure. Yeah, that's a smart question. I'll make sure to get you an answer that satisfies you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Senator McKinney.
Thank you. In allowing the department to assist in making decisions, I guess one thing just popped in my head, and I probably should have asked him because I'm curious to know, what if an 18-year-old is in the custody of DHHS, was raped, and wants an abortion? Would they stop that 18-year-old?
18-year-olds can consent to abortion.
Yeah,
in Nebraska.
Okay.
They wouldn't need DHH's consent.
All right. I was just curious.
Good question.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none?
Thank you.
Thank you for